Is this live? Is there a picture that I can see of me talking? Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm speaking to you out there in Washington, D.C., live from Hollywood, California, actually, this morning. And I'm very excited about the things we're going to talk about today. Disappointed that we're going to be talking about them, though, because these are things that don't come to fruition, that don't come to maturity in thought. That there's something previous to thought that we're really shooting for, something that's not of the mind, or the active mind that we're shooting for this morning. And how to get there really is the question of spiritual life. And the wish is that we could see these things as true experientially in the way that we are, and not know them as a list of facts or relationships in the mind. So I'm going to start with 3 poems this morning. These are Zen Death Poems. I've read a few of them in the past for you. And I guess before I do that, I want to assure you, about 2 weeks ago, I gave a lecture here at this temple with the same title. I have changed the lecture. This is a part 2. There's some familiar things in it, but it's not the same thing over again. So if you're concerned about having to listen to the same lecture twice, don't be. There'll be a fresh idea here, and hopefully more than an idea. This first poem is by a monk named Koran Ichikyo, who died on February 12th, 1360, so quite some time ago. And he wrote this poem before he died. All of these poems actually were written on the deathbed of these monks. Empty-handed I entered the world, barefoot I leave it. My coming, my going, 2 simple happenings that got entangled. There's a beauty in the simplicity of this thought. I think, in the Katha Upanishad, Nachiketa says that there's not a better teacher than death. And I think these poems written at the very moment of death shed such a light on that. In this poem, the simplicity of really the purpose of life and the reality of life, that you come into this world empty-handed, crying, completely dependent, with nothing. And you leave the world barefooted, having gained nothing to take with you, having collected nothing to fill your arms with. And you go alone, as you come alone. And I think that knowing that and bearing that as a disposition in ourselves, not just a thought, but a disposition, a piece, an axiom for all of our actions and values in our experience of being, is very important. Life is simple. Life is straightforward. Life's meaning is obvious, ever-present, and deep. That is not the problem of life. The problem of life is the fact that we come with nothing, we try to gain something, and we don't even consider our going in relationship to those things that we're gathering and collecting and building in this life. Muan Jensen, another monk, died on the 22nd of March, 1390. And he writes on his deathbed, "Life is like a cloud of mist emerging from a mountain cave, and death, a floating moon in its celestial course. If you think too much about the meaning they may have, you'll be forever bound, like an ass to a stake." I love his view of life and death being described in such beautiful terms, such peaceful terms. The mist coming from a mountain cave, that drifting into a reality, into existence. And devoid of any real need of meaning or any real need of purpose or direction. But life is a mist drifting from a mountain cave, just that simple going in peace, in a harmony with the nature and the world around it. Its source is definitely in the heights of the mountains, and that brings, of course, its own visions of beauty and time, which for me is very, very present from my time in Colorado, just the breathtaking atmosphere of the mountains and how God is so easily present there. When you stand in that environment, it's no wonder that for thousands of years, the ancient seekers, sadhus, and sages have wandered into the mountains to see these truths. So life is like a cloud of mist emerging from a mountain cave, and death a floating moon, a time of reflection, a time of peacefulness, a time again of rhythm and harmony, of a comfortable isness that's not in a hurry, not full of fear, not full of questions, no anxiety. That death is a floating moon, floating in its celestial course. That death is a part of the celestial meaning of life. It's part and parcel of being human. It's not something that happens to us. It's something that we are already. That it's a reality that is part and parcel of this experience of being, this experience of living, this experience of wondering. A floating moon in its celestial course. If you think too much about the meaning they may have, you'll be bound forever like an ass to a stake. So if you think that in this world, in this experience, there's something to be gained, something to be gathered, something to be collected, if you give it meaning in and of itself, you're stuck. The mind will churn forever trying to figure that out, because we know that God is to be known but never defined. He's not a relation with all the rest of the universe. He is that universe. He is life. He is your life. He's your experience, your being. That there's not that separation. And so if you try and think that this life is something to be built in the mind, some sort of philosophy or some side of deep understanding of what is and isn't true or right or good, that's a bondage. That's a chain. Because you are not here in this life. You are this life. You are not an experiencer between two boundaries of life and death. You are the whole. You are the container in which it happens. You are not the thing itself. If you were the thing itself, it would be very important. Or if you were experiencing the thing as an outsider, it would be important to understand and to know. And that's the difficulty. That's the wonder. I think that's the beauty of spiritual life. The puzzle that we're trying to undo is that everything we've known, everything that we've learned in life has been a thought castle, a relationship between entities in the mind. And that learning has always been establishing relationship. What is that to us? What is that to me? How do I use that? What does it mean? How does that change me? How does that improve me? We try and cram more and more into the structures of the mind. And interestingly enough, as we say again and again, the reason that that's delusional, the reason that that's problematic, is because you're looking at the mind. The mind isn't you. By the mere fact you're watching your thoughts means that they are not you. And so the meaning and fulfillment of this experience of being is not going to be something that you look at. It's a realization, an aha at what you are and what is, and a very changing in the essence of the understanding of what you are and who you are. If you think too much about the meaning they may have, you'll be bound forever like an ass to a stake. Life is an ever-rolling wheel, and every day is the right one. He who recites poems at his death adds frost to snow. So he's there saying, even in this action of writing a poem on his deathbed, to give us something meaningful as we sit here hoping to hear some profound idea that's going to change everything for us, he's saying, I'm just adding another layer of frost to the snow. Everything that can be said is already said. Everything that can be known is already known. Everything that can be experienced is already experienced. This is something you cannot add to and cannot take from. It's the very nature of the soul. You, as a being, you as that, as your true nature, you cannot be added to. You cannot learn something. You cannot lose anything. You can't be added to or taken from. You are a wholeness, a completeness, a oneness without a second. In the Avadutta Gita, he says some very mysterious things, the teacher writes. I know your supreme form to be directly perceivable, like the sky. I know your lower form to be as water in a mirage. And so this idea of what we truly are, our supreme form, is directly perceivable. Now, what's he mean when he says to us, your true form is directly perceivable? This is such a beautiful thing and such a cornerstone of our confusion, because we don't know a direct perception. We don't know a direct perception. Swami Prabhupada told me one time over lunch in the monastery in San Francisco. He said that the reason that one is changed forever by realization is not because you've learned something, but because it is the only direct experience you will ever have. Now, those of you who've listened to me in the past, you'll know where I'm going with this. It's this idea that everything in this world that you experience as a body-mind is not direct. I'll remind you that all of your senses get translated into nerve impulses that then get sent to a brain which is in its dark box, has no access, no direct access to the world outside. It depends on what is brought to it by the nerves in the form of nerve impulses, not the thing itself. Your eyes are not taking light to the brain so the brain can look at the light and say, oh, that's what that is. That light never makes it to the brain, never makes it to the mind. That light gets translated into an impulse. That impulse goes to the brain. The brain takes that impulse and creates a symbol of what is being given to it. A symbol for light, a symbol for a tree, a symbol for the breeze, for the sunset. Like communication, like what I'm doing for you right now. I speak to you. What's happening in my mind? When I say sunset, I'm seeing the most beautiful sunset I've seen, which incidentally happened in Abilene, Texas in 1983. Walking across campus and looking up at the world on fire, that desert, southwestern desert sunset. What can I give you? I can say a southwestern desert sunset, and what do? You grab a picture from a book that you remember, or your own wonderful sunset that you saw in Santa Barbara, or some beautiful picture that you saw in an art gallery. Whatever things you grab out that are in your mind, you then apply them to the word sunset that I'm giving to you. And we think that we're communicating, but I have not been able to give to you my beautiful sunset, the most beautiful thing I've seen in my life. I've had to package it into a clunky little word and give you that word, and from that word you have to put your clunky ideas on it and hope that somehow we're aligning, that somehow we're communicating, that somehow we're saying something to each other. And this is life. This is our only experience of being when we're deluded into the idea of being a body and mind. And here, the teacher is telling us, you will know yourself when you have that first direct experience, an experience of being that happens through the back door of mind, before thought, before waking, before thinking, before personality, before ego, before fear, before anxiety, before all of these things, before any definition that you've concocted about what you are and who you are, before personality, this experience is. That is what we're trying to return to undo all of this fluff of interpretation and guessing and building in the mind some idea of ourself. We're trying to let go of all of that so that our supreme form can be directly experienced, not interpreted, not given to us by a thought form, not pushed into clunky words or clunky philosophies that bend and warp and never match the real thing. I know your supreme form to be directly perceivable like the sky. Your form is like the sky. It has no boundaries. Where does the sky begin and where does it end? And if you go and take a piece of the sky, what do you have? What color is it? How tall is it? How wide is it? The sky is an infinity that only seems to be bounded, only seems to have a color, only seems to have a space of occupation. But your supreme nature is direct and absolute, without limit, without a boundary, able to play and function within these pretend walls, these imagined walls. But indeed, you are the ever free, ever pure. I know your lower form. What is your lower form? It's your personality. It's that wonderful you that your mother raised. It's the you that's afraid of what's going to happen when you die. It's the you that's afraid of dying, that can't imagine it. It's the you that feels anxious about your job and about your accomplishments. It's you who feels responsible for all the wrong things that you've done and all the good things that you've done and everything that happens in the times to come. This is you. He says, I know this lower form, this form that we live in that we think is so important, that drives us to depression and drives us to excitement and drives us to just this frenetic movement of life, needing to entertain ourselves, needing to distract ourselves, needing to feed ourselves, to clothe ourselves, to comfort ourselves, to rest ourselves. This is our lower nature. And he says, I know your lower form to be as water in a mirage. Which means that, yes, it's tasteable, it's visible, it's seeable, it's experienceable. But there's no there. You're not going to get it there. There's nothing for you to grab. There's nothing for you to hold. Why? Because you came into this world empty-handed and you leave barefooted. There is nothing here to be accomplished. I know your supreme form to be directly perceivable like the sky. I know your lower form to be as water in a mirage. So today we're going to explore this notion. I call it an idea because it is presented to us as something in the mind that we can look at and we're going to think about. But as we're doing it, try and not think about it. Try and step behind what's being said and what's going through the mind. Don't grab at anything. Don't identify with anything. Don't hold on to anything. Don't think that in this lecture is something that you need to know to realize, because that is bondage. That poem where he says there, remember, where he says, if you think too much about the meaning they may have, you'll be bound forever like an ass to a stake. Do not think that realization lies in words or in lectures or in teachings or even in doings. It's before all of that. It's direct. It doesn't involve the machinations of a mind. It doesn't involve the relationships between objects. It doesn't involve personalities. It doesn't involve analysis. It doesn't involve philosophy. It is you. It is the experience. It is that fundamental being. He says, when all of this appears to you as false, when the body and so on appear to you like space, then you know Brahman truly. For you, there is no dual series. This is where, of course, the name of the title of the lecture comes from. That was such a striking idea to me. And again, it's still in the world of ideas, and that's what we're trying desperately to not be engaged in. Let this wash through you and feel the residue of it. It is not the thing itself. It's only pointing at something that we are. He says, when all of this appears to you as false, when it appears to you like space, when your body appears to you like space, what an interesting idea that is. What's he trying to say to you? When your body appears as space, when you understand that there is indeed no boundary to the body, when he says, when you understand that the body is as much of an idea as everything else in your mind. Going back to what we talked about, how the mind has no reality in it. It only has symbols of a reality, that we don't live in a world, we live in a mind. And the body is as much an interpretation and a part of that mind as any piece of philosophy that you might have in there, as any piece of calculus knowledge or English grammatical knowledge or poem you may have remembered. Your body is not different from any of those things. And when you understand that your body is merely conceptual, merely an idea, a collection of limitations and restrictions fed to you through the senses and interpreted by a mind, when you know that to be true, then you will know Brahman truly. For you, there is no dual series. You'll understand that oneness of isness, that it's not broken into bodies and personalities and brains and minds and facts and philosophies, that it's a unity without boundary, where everything is one and nothing can be pulled out individually and particularized, that there is no object. Objects are only symbols, symbols of ignorance, created in a mind that's desperately trying to hold infinity in a finite container. It can't be done. The writer of the Avadhuta Gita goes on to say, what I do, what I eat, what I sacrifice, what I give, all this is not mine in the least. I am pure, unborn, undecaying. You own nothing. In the idea of oneness, in the idea of body as space, in the idea of being, what do you own? In an experience where you come in empty-handed and leave barefooted, what do you own? So what is this notion of collecting and giving, of winning and losing, of building and tearing down? It's an idea that is a delusion. There are no objects here. This world does not exist. Time is a constant loop of change. You know, a tree begins as a seed, which how can you imagine a tree within a seed? And from water and air and nutrition, it grows into a tree, and you say, oh my God, look at that huge tree, what an amazing tree. You come back and there's a stump, where's the tree? Take anything that you love and add 100 years to it, and what has it become? Take any person you love and add 100 years to them. What do they become? Take any man or woman that you find beautiful and add 100 years to them, and what have they become? Where is the reality of it? Take that shiny, brand new computer that's selling for $10 million right now and bring it home. And in 10 years, what do you have? In 100 years, what do you have? Do you see why desire needs to be given up? Because nothing can fulfill it, because nothing is what it seems. There is no reality to it. It crumbles before your eyes. These chairs in this room, were they always chairs? No, incidentally, they used to be trees. What an interesting idea. Now they're chairs. Why don't I see trees when I look at them? And what will they be when they're gone, when they're carted off to the dump? And later on, somebody finds a little piece of a leg of the chair buried in the dirt when they're building their new temple. And they wonder, gosh, I wonder how this got here. You see the delusion of time, the delusion of space, the delusion of objects, of things, the delusion of particular, the delusion of having all of these things in mind and thinking that they're real, and that some essential thing exists within them that will give you something that will add to your soul or take away from it. Do you see there's nothing here to be taken Nothing here to be owned. Nothing here to be given. You are the here of here. You are the now of now. Know all this universe to be formless. Take that as an axiom for your day. Know all of this universe to be formless. So what you're seeing is not real. Just like a dream, you say, well, how can it be not real? It's right here. I can say it's not real and it's not right here because last night I dreamed of an ocean in my bedroom. I dreamed of a vast universe. I dreamed of a gang of people chasing me through the streets of some known city. Was there a city? Was there an ocean? Was there an enemy? Was I being chased? Who was I? I was asleep in a bed, separate and apart from everything that I was experiencing. And when I woke this morning, I knew it to be unreal. I knew that I didn't have to dry off after an ocean swim, or I didn't have to rest after running away from my enemy in the city. Know this entire universe to be formless. Know all this universe to be without change. Going back to our idea of being that dreamer, you're lying in bed unchanged. You're not exerting yourself as you flee your enemies in the city. You are unchanged, unaffected, untouched. You cannot be hurt. You cannot be affected. Know that to be the nature of this universe, of this being, of this experience. Know all this to be of purified body. Oh, this purified body, I love this idea. This all is your body. What does he mean by purified? He means devoid of the particularization. Purity is the lack of me and mine. Because me and mine requires restriction and limitation. It requires delusion. It requires you to not understand who you are. This world that you're experiencing is your very self. There is nothing more intimate than life. Nothing more intimate than love. Nothing more intimate than intelligence. Nothing more beautiful than being. It's all of purified body, an entire universe happening within you, the mind, that eternal, infinite mind, the mind free of me and mine. Know all this universe to be of the nature of the absolute. What does that mean? Let's take that out of philosophy. Nature of the absolute. Who are you? And how do you know anything? There's a process to knowing in the worldly sense, in the world of knowledge as information, knowledge as relativity in the mind. Everything that you learned, you've placed in relation to the self, to you. Somebody can't be another person unless you see yourself as a person. Somebody can't be far away from you unless you know where you are. Somebody can't be big unless you know your size. Somebody can't have a gender unless you know your gender. Somebody can't have an age unless you know your age. You see, you have built an entire world by relating it to yourself, and you've done that as if the world is real and you're real and that there's a relationship between you. And what the sage is telling us here, that all of this universe is of the nature of the absolute. What is the absolute? The absolute is the you that you've been comparing everything to for all of your life without giving a moment's thought to what it is that you're comparing this universe to as you come to, quote, know it, or, quote, understand it. We have paid attention to the universe as infinitum, and never taken a moment to say, gosh, what am I referring to? What am I comparing all of this to? How am I giving it relationship? What is this absolute? What is its nature? You are that absolute. Let all of this change imply the unchanging in you that measures that change. Let all of this coming and going imply to that being which is stationary within you that recognizes change. When you're in an elevator and the elevator's going up. I remember as a kid, I didn't quite understand an elevator because you'd walk in through this overly complicated door, it seemed, this massive thing that slides open. You go into this little tiny room, the door closes. You might hear something, feel something. You don't really know what it is as a kid, and then that door opens and you're somewhere else. Why? Because you were changing with the system you were in. So you didn't register movement. You didn't register change until the doors opened. That's a big clue for us, that we are not changing, that we are an absolute. Because if we were part of the system within which we seem to exist, we couldn't see all of the change because we would have nothing to compare it to. But we have an unchanging, unmoving, absolute entity, as it were, within us, by which we create the relative world by measuring it from that point of absoluteness, that point of being. Know this universe to be that, not the thing that you're measuring. Know the universe to be that unchanging, eternal, ever-present self that can never be anywhere but here, can never be at another time but now. That unchanging here and now, from which all of this becomes relative and takes an objective existence. Pay attention to that from which everything is being measured, and not the things that you're measuring. In Inspired Talks, Vivekananda says, freedom can never belong to name and form. Why? Because what is name and form but a restriction and a limitation, a boundary that you can't cross? That's name and form. You can never be free within a limitation and a restriction. Freedom is not doing what you want. Freedom is having no want. Know that freedom can never belong to name and form. So if it's freedom you want, you'll have to understand or know something intuitively deeper, a direct experience of an absolute self that cannot be broken into objects, that cannot be in relationship to anything else, that cannot be affected by anything else, that cannot be added to, that cannot be taken away from, that comes into this experience empty-handed and walks out of it barefoot. As by means of name and form, parts are made out of clay, so we are made out of Brahman, we're made out of God, the divine. But then Brahman becomes limited and is not free. Freedom can never belong to the relative, which is saying the same thing in a different way. You have to have boundaries, limitations, and restrictions in order to have a relative world. And relativity without an absolute is meaningless. If you think about that one, that's an interesting idea. If there was no absolute, unchanging, eternal self, there could not be a relative world, because nothing could be measured. Nothing could have a dimension. All of the limitations and restrictions would be without meaning. Because according to what are they limited and restricted? According to what are they far or near? According to what are they happy or sad? Freedom can never belong to the relative. A part can never say, I am free. As a pot, only as it loses all ideas of form does it become free. The whole universe is only the self with variations, one tune made bearable by variations. This whole universe is only the self with variations. It's only you. Just like that dream that you had, everything that you saw in that dream. It's a marvelous thing in a dream that you can look at a mountain range that's 200 miles away. In reality, it's no farther than one ear to the other. It all happened in that space of your head. And yet you saw a mountain. How did you fit a mountain in your mind? And that mountain was 200 miles away. How did you fit 200 miles into your mind? You see, relativity can't exist without an absolute. It has no meaning. It has no inherent existence, just like that dream. So what does it mean? What is the underlying reality? Because if you go into nihilism, that nothing is real, there is nothing there, that it's meaningless, that I have no form, it can seem like there's no reason to get up. It can seem like there's no reason for anything. It can go into a spiral of depression. I want to dwell a lot on that, because when you stop acting as an ego, as a limitation and a restriction, as a particularized point in your infinite self, when you stop acting from that place, it's not that everything stops. It's that what you are manifests freely. And what is that? There's quite a few verses here in the Gita. There's 10 of them. I'm going to take a moment to go through them because it's going to take us a little bit. He says, the Supreme Lord said, my dear friend. Now, that is so beautiful, that as you approach this world to understand, to know its nature, the first thing the world says to you, the first thing that this other that you think exists outside of yourself says to you is, my dear friend. So that frames your relationship with this life. My dear friend. Mighty armed Arjuna, who's the king in the chariot now, getting this information from the Lord. Listen again to my supreme word, which I shall impart to you for your benefit, and which will give you great joy. So as you stand in this place of ignorance with all of your anxieties, all of your fears, all of your insecurities, all of your terror of what's going to happen to you and what I'm going to become and what I am, and oh my gosh, am I right or wrong? Am I good or bad? Am I fulfilled or unfulfilled? He says, my dear friend, out of my compassion, I will give you something solely for your benefit that you don't have to pay for at all. I give it freely because it's my nature. And it will give you great joy. That's the outcome of spiritual life. Great joy. Neither the hosts of demigods nor the great sages know my origin, because I'm outside of time, for one. So try and conceive that in a mind. You see, a mind, whenever it builds, that's our first limitation and restriction, is the world of thought. Because thought, it always needs three components. It needs the object, it needs the perceiver, and it needs the relationship between the two. If the mind can't have those three pieces of information, it can't conceive of it. So when you come along and someone says, hey, you are one without a second, boom. Know immediately the mind is of no use to you whatsoever. The mind you cannot conceive, you cannot have a thought about, you cannot know it, you cannot observe it, you cannot objectify it, you cannot know what that means in the world of thought, in the world of mind. So immediately you know that spiritual life is not about a philosophy, it is not about a relationship to a universe, it is not about another anything, that it is something that cannot happen in the mind. It's one without a second. And its origin cannot be known because it is not an object. In every respect, I am the source of the demigods and the sages. Everything springs from that isness. He who knows me as the unborn, that does away with a number of things. That takes somebody out of time. It takes something out of limitation and restriction. It takes someone out of a body. It changes the nature of what we perceive to be dreamlike. Unborn, as the beginningless, As the supreme Lord of all the worlds, he, undiluted among men, is freed from all sins, freed from all sins, freed from all restriction, free from all misunderstanding, free from the bonds of good and evil, free from responsibility. And immediately the worldly mind will say, oh my gosh, well, if I'm free from responsibility, I can do whatever I want. Absolutely not. You don't have a want. You have an isness. And that isness is love. So, you, of course, in freedom, you act out of love, freely. Always. Unlimited. Now, what does unlimited mean? You have no need, so none of your thoughts are selfish. None of your actions are selfish. Because you're not a particular. You're not a vulnerable, broken little idea of limitations and restrictions. You're a fulfilled, infinite, eternal, fearless being whose only motive is love and intelligence and this marvelous wonder of being. Intelligence, knowledge, freedom from doubt and delusion, forgiveness, truthfulness, self-control and calmness, pleasure and pain, birth, death, fear, fearlessness, nonviolence, equanimity, satisfaction, austerity, charity, fame, and infamy are created by me alone. And that me is you when you've let go of having an interpreted experience of your divinity, of knowing that you don't live in the mind, but that you are a container of everything, that there's a singularity to you. It all comes from you. This world has all of its meanings because of you. It doesn't mean anything in and of itself. It doesn't exist in and of itself. You give it existence. You give it meaning. You determine whether something is good or whether something is evil, whether something is big or small, whether it's important or unimportant. You decide whether you want it or are averted by it. Nothing has value until it meets you, the absolute. You are the giver of value. You are the giver of meaning. It's you. Know that and be free in it. The 7 great sages, and before them the 4 other great sages, and the Manus, are born out of my mind, and all creatures in these planets descend from them. Born out of my mind. There is one mind. It is the divine mind. You've rented a little subsection of it. You've rented time on an internet server, as it were. You've got the internet as a whole sitting on the server. You just have access to one little part of it, but it's a whole. And from that mind comes everything. All the creatures and all these planets, all of this universe, born of your mind. Again, we live in a mind, not a world. We know nothing of a world. We're only busy interpreting and applying meaning to senses that are giving us impulses. And from that, we're playing with our symbols of reality. He who knows in truth this glory and this power of mine engages in unalloyed devotional service. Of this there is no doubt. As you come to understand your nature, the particular self, the particular expression, becomes one of worship, born of love, born of amazement, born of infinity. For everything, for everyone, because you know so intimately every object in the world is your very own and born of your very self. You will feel toward everyone as a mother feels toward her son or her daughter. You'll feel toward everything as if it was an heirloom given to you by your grandmother on her lap when you were 7 years old. Everything will be born of richness and depth, profundity and meaning, and you will only walk around eyes wide open, mouth agape, in devotion, in a response of just worship, a worship that overwhelms the senses, a worship that fills the mind, a worship given to you for your benefit, and that will produce the greatest joy. I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. The wise who know this perfectly engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. Ramana Maharshi says there's two things. There's awareness and there's the awareness of awareness. So we don't have some egomaniacal God sitting on a throne somewhere saying, you're going to serve me in full devotion and leave nothing for yourself, you worthless, good for nothing. Is that how we started? He says, no, my dear friend. My dear friend, I do this solely for your benefit and to give you great joy. And in that, you give up self, which is what? In ignorance, it seems like something so amazing. I'm wonderful. I love my personality. I love my body. I love my joys and my experiences of life. That's because you've never known that direct experience he's talking about, something uninterpreted, something unconstructed by mind, something that's not a phantom, something that's real. You've never known it. So this puny things of value that you've collected, which can't follow you out of the game, they mean nothing. So don't imagine you have something to give. Don't imagine that you have something to lose. Don't imagine that there's a you to be abused at all. There is only worship, a sense of the profound, a sense of beauty and marvel. The thoughts of my pure devotees dwell in me. You dwell in this beloved mind. You're absolutely safe. You're absolutely loved. You're absolutely free. Because you exist within a mind whose only reality is love, unconditioned, absolute. Every meditation is simply to try and open to that, to try and understand what that means, to try and free yourself of all the wrong ideas that you have that make you small, that make you weak, that make you afraid. All of spiritual life is letting go of the smallness. My pure devotees dwell in me. Their lives are surrendered to me. Surrendered why? Because there's no reason for a city wall. Because there's no reason for protection. There's no reason for fear. There's no reason for separation. It's all imagined. And they derive what? You derive what? Great satisfaction and bliss, enlightening one another and conversing about this. That's life. Enlightening one another, loving one another, knowing one another, worshiping one another, serving one another, and conversing about the miracle of being. Conversing about the designs of pure love, the imagined boundaries of unconditioned love. To those who are constantly devoted and worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. You can come to this love. You can know it. Can't define it, but it's meant to be known. You will at one point know the perfect lover, the perfect relationship, a pair of arms that you can get lost in. Someone who will never let you down. Out of compassion for them, dwelling in their hearts, I destroy with the shining lamp of knowledge this darkness born of ignorance. That's what you get from the Lord. That's where this great joy comes from, is the destruction of the boundaries and restrictions called personality that have made you small and afraid and made you act as if you could be selfish. He removes the need for selfishness, removes the idea of loneliness, turns on the light that heals depression. Lets you forget about your rights for a moment and realize there's no need. There's a way to come to this place, he says, to be able to use what we call viveka, or discrimination, to learn how in every moment of our lives, in every one of our actions, to discriminate between what is right and wrong, true and false. We shall have to know the test of truth, which is purity, oneness. Everything that makes for oneness is truth. Every moment of our life, which moment does that leave out? None. Every moment, this moment, and every moment, well, there's only one moment, you're always in it. So if you can make sure in this moment to be aware of the divine and the unbroken nature of your oneness, if you can constantly look at the world and see it, what it will be in 100, 1,000 years from now, and treating it accordingly, if you will see the reality, the unchanging absolute that is behind the mind that is perceiving all of this, if you can in every moment and in every action discriminate between what is changing and what is unchanging, and learn to open to the unchanging. You can't see the unchanging because it's you. Vivekananda tells a young boy who's asking him, "Can I see God?" And Vivekananda says, God is like your face. You know it's there. You can't see it. You never will see it. But you'll never doubt it, because you know you have a face. In every moment we stay aware. We don't get caught up in cause and effect. We don't let our minds get convinced of the triad. We don't let our minds break us into small pieces. We keep our eyes on that self which is measuring everything, from which all things derive their value. We keep our mind on that, settled purely there, knowing its oneness, insisting on its oneness, pushing through every thought that tells us otherwise. The external existence is the universe. The inner existence is called Prakriti. This is from the Avadhuta Gita. One should try to know that which is more interior than the inner existence. He adds a third one here. I never saw this before, and it's a marvelous clue that he gives you. And he's talking about that space before mind. He's talking about that direct experience of being that isn't an interpretation of senses, is not an ideation, does not have the qualities of the triad necessary for a thought. That's where we're trying to go. That's where we're trying to be. And oddly enough, we've never been anywhere else. We've never known anything else. We've just always created a particularization from which to view it all. And that was our biggest mistake. Know that within you, you should try to know that which is more interior than the inner existence. Now, the inner existence is your thoughts, the inner world, the part that's private to you. That's not where God is. A lot of times when we go into our meditation, we think God is in that inner space somewhere. If I just repeat the name over and over, that's going to be doing it, because God will appear in my mind. I'll have a vision of the mother or the father or the beloved, and that will be the thing. That will be a step in the thing. But it's still a thing. And there's no oneness in a thing. There's no freedom in a thing. So try to go one step farther. Become the watcher of the mind that you've always been, but know that you're the watcher of the mind. And let all of this enchanting world imply the truth of that being, the truth that that being loves and loves alone. That's why everything it produces is motivated by love. Everything. I'll leave that as an exercise. Everything motivated by love alone. Find that unchanging principle of love within you, which is manifesting your world, and remove its limitations and its restrictions so that your anxiety disappears, so that your loneliness becomes an imagination. Know that which is more interior than the inner existence, that which is like water within the kernel of a coconut. I love that idea, because what is water? Water is the best representation in the finite world of something without form. Water can be anything. Know that within you is the self that is like the water in a coconut. It's formless. It can be anything. It's only bounded by a coconut seemingly. As soon as that shell is broken, it's ever free. It goes, it runs, it plays. It's in frolicking joy of its own self. Illusory knowledge relates to what is outside. If you place anything outside of yourself, it's illusory, because there is no outside of yourself. You are always in your mind. The world you live in, as we've said, is a mind and not a world. There is no outside of you. Illusory knowledge relates to what is outside. Correct knowledge to what is inside. Try to know that which is more interior than the inside. That which is like water within the kernel of a coconut. Where is this mystery that cannot be looked at, cannot be experienced, but is the foundational isness from which you know, appreciate, understand everything? What is the nature of the ruler that is you, from which an entire relational universe has been discovered and created and imagined? Illusory knowledge. There's a story in the Yoga Vasishta, which I don't have time for, but I'm going to read it anyway, bring a few points here. A certain brahmachari, which is a novice monk or a renouncer of things, a certain brahmachari, considering himself to be a man of renunciation, gave up all material possessions, retaining only a few clothes, a meditation rug, and a water pot. Now, you would think that someone like that's doing pretty good, all right? He says, in order to make the disciple understand the meaning of real renunciation, his teacher told him, "What have you renounced? You have not renounced everything. You have not renounced anything." The disciple was surprised and thought, "What? I have. After all, I've given up everything but a few clothes and a rug and a water pot. Come on, I've renounced everything. Does my teacher want me to give up these few possessions also?" So he built a fire and threw the clothing, the water pot, and the rug into the flames one by one. Then he told his teacher, "Sir, I have now renounced everything." The teacher said, "Do you think that you've renounced everything? If you mean the pieces of cloth what are they made of? A few strands of cotton. Likewise, the other items are but forms of matter. Giving them up, what renunciation have you achieved? What have you done? The disciple began to think, what else do I have? Yes, I have my body. All right, I shall offer up my body in the fire. He was about to throw himself on a blaze when the teacher called out, stop, stop. Think for a moment about what you are doing. Is the body yours? It came into existence through your mother and father. Food made it grow. What right have you to it? Upon hearing these words, the disciple suddenly saw the light. By the blessing of his teacher, he realized it was the ego that one was to get rid of. If you can give up pride, then you really have renounced. Otherwise, the giving up of material objects and even your body does not constitute real renunciation. This is not a doing exercise. It's not about accomplishing something. This is about removing a prism in your mind that has convinced you you're separate and apart from everything, and that you have concerns and rights and fears and needs that trump others, that trump the world around you, that require selfishness, that require the sense of agency, that requires you to be the center of the kingdom you live in, who rules everything. A world that you've created where God is out there and I am here in this little tiny box of my body-mind, can do whatever desires come before me. I can have them, I can be them. And in that small space you live, and in that small space the whole world pays for it. The whole world pays for your deluded freedom of a particular individualized self. All the farmers out there working in their fields today are doing that so your fat little self can have food at the dinner table tonight. All those people slaving away in China and to build your computers so that you can play your video game. The whole world has to arrange itself to serve fat little you when you decide that you're separate and apart, when you know yourself as an individual, and when you clutch with great joy your little personality of ego and think that that's something important and something beautiful, when even that cannot go with you when this body drops. Renunciation is jumping into love without any concern of loss or gain. It's freedom that can only come when you give up form, when you know the nature of being. This is renunciation. This is knowing. And it has nothing to do with thoughts, nothing to do with facts, nothing to do with relationships. We can do everything, Vivekananda says. The Vedanta teaches men to have faith in themselves first. As certain religions of the world say that a man who does not believe in a personal God outside of himself is an atheist, the Vedanta says a man who does not believe in himself is an atheist. Because all things are born of that beloved divine. This self, individualized and deluded as it might be, is born of the seed of divinity, of God. A man who does not believe in himself is an atheist. Not believing in the glory of our own soul is what is called atheism. I'm going to read the poems again and leave those sitting in the mind to affect the world you've created. Garan Ichikyo, who died February 12, 1360. Empty-handed I entered the world, barefoot I leave it. My coming, my going, two simple things that got entangled. Muan Jensen, having died on the 22nd of March, 1390. Life is like a cloud of mist emerging from a mountain cave. And death? Death, a floating moon in its celestial course. If you think too much about the meaning they may have, you'll be bound forever like an ass to a stake. Life is an ever-rolling wheel, and every day is the right one. He who recites poems at his death adds frost to snow. Open your eyes and be free.